I tried my hardest to stay up on Wednesday night till 10:59 p.m., but I just couldn't do it. So why was Wednesday night different than all other nights? Who else was up on Wednesday night at close to 10:59 p.m. right there? Because I'll tell you why I was up, because Wednesday night I had the chance to win $1.5 billion. So like many of you, I'll admit it publicly, even if you don't want to, I got swept up in Powerball mania. And as I held that ticket in my hand, I probably thought of many of the things that you thought of. What would I do with $900 million? I think that was the sum after taxes.
No.
The chance of winning the Powerball is this specific one, 1 in 292.2 million chance. 1 in 292.2 million. But that didn't scare me away from dreaming. And I'm sure many of you did. And as I fell asleep that night, I did dream. Because I didn't know that I didn't win. And I suspect none of you did either. So, just putting it out there. So the question is, you didn't win. You didn't win. So, what do? Do you stop dreaming? That's the question. Do you stop? No. So as Jews, we've had a history of being dreamers. Jacob, our father Yaakov, famously dreamed of a stairway to heaven. Joseph, his son, was known for his dreaming and interpreting dreams, others' dreams. And of course, who can forget the famous quote from Theodore Herzl, "If you will it, it is no dream." But it's the kind of dreams that we have dreamt that have made us who we are today. Now, Powerball dreams, let's face it, involve a lot of self. I heard one guy in the radio say this. What would he do with his winnings for Powerball? He said, I would buy 2 yachts. One yacht to sail in, and another yacht which I will sink by cannon fire from the first yacht. And why? Because it's just $10 million. Who cares? I'll get another one. That's what he wanted to do. Okay. So today I want to talk about our dreams. The kind of dreams that we should dream about for our future. In this week's Parashat, we read about the final plagues, the 3 final plagues. The plagues of locusts, the plague of darkness, and the plague of the death of the firstborn. So one thing I noticed was that there's a similarity between the 3 plagues. And I'll share that with you right now. The first plague of locusts, darkness covers the sky. Literally, it says in chapter 10, verse 15, they hid all the land from view. The land was darkened. So that's what the locust did. Then we come to the plague of darkness, which is pretty obvious. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. And then we come to the last plague, the slaying of the firstborn. And Moshe says, thus said the Lord, toward midnight, chatzot halayla, I will go forth among the Egyptians. And in verse 12:29, when it actually happens, it says, in the middle of the night, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. So, who in here sees a connection between the 3? And what is that connection? You can yell it out if you like. Dark, who said that? You get a piece of candy if I have that. Darkness. Yes, someone give her a piece of candy. Good. Darkness is the connection. Locusts darkened the land. A darkness overtook Egypt that could be touched. And the Egyptians, firstborn, were slain when? In the middle of the night. The darkest time during a 24-hour period. So the question is, what happened to the Israelites? What happened to our ancestors? Can you imagine if you were standing in their sandals? It seems that darkness consumed everything they had ever known up until that point. Remember, all they ever knew was Egypt, and darkness is consuming it. And here's where we find something really interesting. Even in these dark times, the darkest of times, the Israelites had light. And the Torah tells us so in the plague of darkness. Chapter 10:23, people could not see one another. This is about the plague of darkness. And for 3 days, no one could get up from where he was. But all of the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. In Hebrew, Ulachol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvotam. They all had light. How could the Israelites have light when everyone else had darkness? So many of the commentators ask this question. Most of them say a simple reason. The Israelites, they lived in a part of Egypt called Goshen. They were segregated. They lived in a place called Goshen. So they had light and everyone else had darkness. But Rashbam, who's Rashi's grandson, a famous medieval commentator, disagrees. And he says that even the Israelites who dwelled in an Egyptian's house had light. So how could they have had light? So there seemed to be something different about the Israelites. They could see light even in the darkest of times. They could see hope even when none seemed to have been found. Where there was no hope, they could find it. Theodore Herzl, remember that line, if you will it, it is no dream. Think about this. Think about our light. A nation exiled from its homeland after 2,000 years of persecution, of exile, returns and reestablishes the modern state of Israel. We, Jews, could see the light even in the darkest of times. Even in the darkness of the Holocaust, we saw something. But this light gave us the ability also to look outward. The interesting thing about darkness is that it might tempt you to become more self-centered, to be more alone. If you can't see anyone, how could you reach out to them? How could you look out for anyone if you can't see anything yourself? Light forces you to look outward. Light is the tool of the prophets. The prophet, the major prophet, is who? Moses. He is our prophet. And perhaps this is the message that Moshe was trying to give Pharaoh and Egypt. Oppression and subjugation of others might make you more comfortable. It might. Things might seem bright to you as you're oppressing others. But ultimately, it will lead you to darkness. Prophets use light to make us look out, to shine light on injustice. That's what prophets do. This Shabbat, this weekend, we honor a prophet of our time, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was, I believe, one of the most famous dreamers in American history. If Dr. King had a Powerball ticket, what would he have dreamed of? Fortunately, we know. We know because he told us on August 28, 1963 in Washington, D.C. in his famous speech, the I Have a Dream speech. And we're going to study this tomorrow morning for those who want to come for our Meet the Torah class at 9:30 a.m. He said 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, it was Abraham Lincoln, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great nation, as a great beacon, light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. What would this new life that Dr. King was talking about look like? What would it bring? What sort of world would it create, this world of a dream that he described? Dr. King tells the crowd what it would look like. He said, little white boys and girls and little black boys and little black girls. And Alabama, which was known at the time as the most racist state in the Union, would be joining hands together. And not just them, but he opened it up. He said all Americans will taste freedom when all God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. What were they free of? Free from oppression, from racism, from darkness. This is what he dreamed of. The ability to look beyond oneself, the ability to look not just at your tribe, but at others. And of course, our country still struggles with injustice against people of color. This week, Chancellor Arnold Eisen, who's the Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, in an article he wrote in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, quoted Michelle Alexander. She's a law professor at Ohio State University. And he said, the study says that in Washington, D.C., it is estimated that 3 out of 4 young black men, and nearly all those in the poorest of neighborhoods, can expect to serve time in prison. In Chicago, the total population of current and ex-felons among black males is equivalent to 55% of the black adult male population, and an astonishing 80% of the adult black male workforce. Nationwide, the rate of imprisonment for blacks on drug charges dwarfs the rate of whites, despite the fact that people of all races use and sell illegal drugs at remarkably similar rates. A 1995 survey asked respondents in America to close your eyes for a second and envision a drug user and describe that person to me. 95% pictured a black drug user at a time when only 15% of drug users in the U.S. were African American, and that actually percentage still is the same to this day. And so we have a choice. We can choose to remain in the darkness, even though it might seem light, or we can open our eyes and look out with light, the light that God gave us, and to fight injustice. There was a very famous rabbi who Brandon quoted, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who walked with Dr. King in Selma across the bridge, who wrote a famous telegram to President John F. Kennedy, who said that we need a Marshall Plan in our country for the Negro population. That's the words he used at the time. Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King became very good friends, and it had to do with a book that Rabbi Heschel wrote, his first book. It was called The Prophet. And in his book, he talks about what a prophet does. A prophet brings light to injustice to the world. And that light is in us. That light is in each one of you if you allow yourself to let it uncover. And it's the light that God gave us. And I know you might be thinking, who am I? I'm not Rabbi Heschel. I'm not Dr. King. What can I do? I'm not a prophet. But here's the thing. All of us dream. All of us have dreams. And the Talmud tells us a dream is 1/60th of prophecy. So I want us all to remember that. As we dream, when we buy our next Powerball ticket, what we could build in this world, not just buying yachts, but creating a more just world together, to bring freedom to the oppressed, to continue the work of Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel and thousands of others. Shabbat Shalom.